Hello everybody, I am back with my big jar and I'm going to pick a couple more books for my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. So if you've been keeping up with what I've been doing, I have all the books in here, fiction and nonfiction, on my shelves that I haven't read or it's been years since I read. And I'm going through pulling books out of here. I'll read at least the first chapter, decide whether I'm going to keep reading it or if I'm going to actually unhaul it and get rid of it if I don't feel like reading it. So that is where I'm at, and I am going to pull out a fiction and a nonfiction. The nonfiction are all these blue ones in here. I have a whole wall of nonfiction, so there's a lot of them. And then the fiction ones are colored based on their genre. So I am going to go ahead and see what I pull. Let's stir it up good again. The last set I got was a 4-star and a 5-star, so I'm happy about that. Okay, what do we got here? What is this one? Ah, here's the nonfiction. So my nonfiction, The Canadian Cowboy. Okay, so we'll take a look at that one. And now I need a fiction one. Aha, here's fiction. It is green, I believe, which should be Canadian literature. The Commodore's Barge by Max Braithwaite. Okay, I will find those ones and I will be right back. Okay, I found both the books. So we'll start with the nonfiction one here. This one is called The Canadian Cowboy, Stories of Cows, Cowboys, and Cayuses by Andy Russell. So this one here has been, we've had it on our shelf for quite a long time, but it's basically a history of the Canadian cowboy, concentrating in Alberta, but also looking at Saskatchewan and British Columbia. And this guy apparently is a former bronco buster and mountain man. So we'll see. I recognize his name from something or other. I have to look up and see a little bit more about who he is. So, but I recognize his name from cowboy history and stuff. So we will read that and see how that goes. And then this one here was written in the late 70s, and this guy is a Canadian humorist. So it says that Canada's hardy humorist returns to the prairies with a naval spoof that's awash with nautical nonsense. So it sounds like it's supposed to be a humorous book. It's set during World War II. Yeah, set during World War II. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see if the humor aged well enough to be readable, and I will let you know what I think after reading about a chapter. Ninja, what are you doing? You helping me read? I also have little Phil on my lap today. Hi, Phil. You guys are helping me read, hey? This one right now.
Is that all your Ninja?
That's Ninja.
Oh, yeah.
Ninja and Phil. I'm here with a little update. So I started both of these books this one last night, this one this morning. And I will tell you about this one first. I'm DNFing it. I read the first 2 chapters and I didn't care for it. The humor, in my opinion, didn't age well. After I read the first 2 chapters, I was kind of neither here nor there about it. It wasn't one way or the other, but I just wasn't finding it very interesting. The humor that had been in there was kind of plays on names and stuff like that were a little dirty, and I don't know, I just didn't find it overly funny. But then I decided to just kind of flip through it and see what else was in the book, and there were at least 2 instances that I found when I was just kind of skim reading of, I'm not sure what I can say on YouTube, but sexual assault, I guess. I don't know, hopefully YouTube doesn't not like me saying that word, but anyways, in there that were treated as humor kind of thing. So like I say, it didn't age well to me, and I just wasn't finding it interesting. So I am going to unhaul that one. And I did also have, way back at a used book sale, I had picked up 5 more of his, and I am going to just unhaul them all. The only one that I was sort of interested in possibly reading was the Why Shoot the Teacher one, since that was really famous, and it was set in the 1930s. So this is the only one that I might keep because I'm interested in the 1930s, and it's basically his story of being a teacher in the 30s. So that one I might keep, but the rest of them I'm going to unhaul for sure. This one I still might unhaul because I didn't care for his reading style. I might just kind of take a little look through it, but I don't know. So that's that one. And then I started reading this one, and I got to chapter, where am I here? Because I forgot my bookmark. Chapter 2. So I read the introduction and chapter 1. So it's actually 52 pages that I read. And I'm finding this one quite interesting so far. There's certain things in it, like the first chapter is basically, the history of how cattle came to North America, cattle and horses came to North America, and, the beginnings of the cowboys bringing cattle up to the northern part of the world from Texas and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a few things in there that, were kind of, a lot of it was really interesting. There was a few word choices and stuff that weren't the greatest, but I mean, it's a little bit of an older book. It was written in 93, so a little bit of an older book, and he does quote a large section from a book that was written in 1927, I believe, and there's a few words in there that aren't really acceptable at all today, but it was actually quoting a historical document, so I'm a little easier going on that. So anyways, but I'm going to keep reading it, and I'm quite enjoying the story so far. It's basically, he's going to be moving into talking more about, further about the history of bringing cattle and everything into Canada. And then it looks like he has a whole bunch of stories about, his life as a young man and working cattle and all that kind of stuff in the prairies and in Alberta, and some of the things to do with rodeo and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite an interesting history, and it's an easy read. The text is very readable. He's quite a good storyteller. So I am going to keep reading that one. Because I decided to DNF the novel, I'm going to go ahead and pick another novel. So if I pick a nonfiction one, I'll put it back. And let's see what I get. Another green one. Okay. This one here is The Maleness of God by Brenda Baker. Now, that one is actually right here. So this one was a book that I got at a conference that I was at, a writing conference. And it's actually signed by the author and everything. It is a book about women and how they share the planet with men, and so we'll see if I like it or not. I bought it because she was the main speaker at the conference. I've never tried it, so I will give that a try and see if I like it. I'm not sure if it's going to be my style because it's a little bit I tend to prefer, like, mysteries, and I'm not really into a lot of contemporary sort of stuff like that, but we'll give it a read and I will let you know what I think of it. Okay, just gonna give you guys a little quick update. This is my little old lady Pip. She's 18 years old. Ancient. Hey Pippi, say hi to the camera. Hi. She's blind and deaf. Anyway, so last night I started this one and I am going to keep reading it. So you can see the author. It's proof that you shouldn't judge a book by just what you think your tastes are, because so far I'm enjoying it. It's actually a collection of short stories, and I read the first 2 short stories, and so I'm going to keep going with that. Her writing style is very readable, and yeah, so I found that kind of interesting. And I did also start this one. I had said I was going to unhaul all of his books, but this was the one of his that I had actually wanted to read, which was the whole reason why I had bought the bunch that I found at the used bookstore, because it's set in the 1930s and it's basically about a small town school teacher in the 30s. And I'm kind of obsessed with that time period. So I got to chapter 4, which is on page 34. And so far, I'm actually enjoying it. There's been nothing too bothersome happening for me to put it down. So I am going to read this one, and then I'll decide whether I'm going to actually keep this one or not. But I am still going to unhaul the other ones, because the other ones, this one's more of a biography of his experiences as a school teacher in the 30s. So it's a little bit different. The other ones were his humor works. And like I said, I did not find his humor very humorous. It didn't age well, according to the way I'm looking at it. So anyways, I am going to keep reading this one, and I'll let you know what I think of that as well. Book update. Hopefully the lighting's okay, because I got the curtains open behind me. So I wanted to update you on these books. This one, Why Shoot the Teacher? I am now on to chapter 7, which is 63 pages in. I'm actually finding it quite interesting. I was a little worried at first that it would be too similar to that other one that I DNF'd, but this is actually more of a it's basically like a story of his experiences as a school teacher during the midst of the Depression in a really small town. And it's quite interesting. I love that time period. I find it fascinating. And so this one here, basically, he takes the job because it's the only job he can find during the Depression. It's like 1933, I believe. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. He lives in the basement of this schoolhouse, and you really get to see the harshness of the prairies during that time. The children who are undernourished, who are coming to the school to try and learn something, but are basically bogged down by the cares of life and all that sort of thing. The various people who are trying to survive, and it kind of really gives you an idea of why the Saskatchewan people who grew up in the 30s have the strength, were known to have the strength that they did, because it was a very harsh time. And this book basically is a first person telling of life during that time in a small drought-ridden prairie town. So it's I'm finding it quite interesting. I think this probably will be the only book of his that I read, though, because I'm not fond of his sense of humor. It's just that this particular topic is interesting to me. The Canadian Cowboy. I am now on chapter 5, which is 84 pages in. Finding this one quite interesting. I think if you're going to read this one, probably I think people who don't have much knowledge of horses and cowboys and that sort of thing would probably still find it interesting, but I find that there are some parts of it that are a little bit might not be easy to understand for someone who's not used to that lifestyle. So like, the part where he's talking about the different equipment that the cowboys used, the saddles and the ropes and things like that. I found it super interesting, having been in the horse world now let's see, geez, it's almost 2 decades now. But anyways, I'm finding it quite interesting. And then this one here, I'm still reading this one. I am now on to the story on page 141. So it's about halfway through the book. I'm finding it quite a mixed bag of stories. The first couple I found interesting. I like her writing style. I find it flows well. The first story was pretty good. The second story, I thought the guy who was telling the story needed a smack upside the head, but that may have been the point. And then the third story I found was really interesting. That's the one that it's titled after, called The Maleness of God. And it was just really interesting because it was about this lady, this mother who goes, she's gone on a drive and she ends up hitting a deer, and then she's thinking about, everything that's going on in her life, and it has to do with her son, who is she has suspicions that he's homosexual, and she's very religious, her family's very religious, and she's torn between wanting to protect him and wanting to, follow what she's been taught, and all that kind of stuff. And so I found it super interesting. But one of the things that I found so interesting about it was the descriptions of church life. Now, okay, real talk here for a minute. I grew up in what I would call a pseudo-Christian cult. So it was basically the pastor, quote unquote, thought every word that he spoke came straight from the mouth of God. And if you disagreed with him, you were disagreeing with God. He was very anti-woman. He really, really disliked women, and especially strong women. If you stood up against him on anything, you were labeled a Jezebel, that sort of thing. And so it was a difficult thing. I crossed him in my early 20s, and we ended up getting out of there. But it's really colored my view on religion since then. I struggle with organized religion, and reading parts of this where it was talking about certain aspects of like her life at church and everything really struck a chord with me, because I could totally picture it, and it was exactly like what we used to go through. Things like she at one point she had asked her pastor about God's gender, and she had asked it to him after a Bible study in private. Next thing she knows, he's standing up in front of the church on Sunday morning preaching basically pretty much against her for even asking the question, things like that. And I remember things like that happening. So it was really, really interesting. Hi, Pip. There's little old ladies right here. So there's just a few things here that I thought were really interesting. Oh, yeah. This part here. Because I can just totally picture this, because just about every pastor that I've ever listened to has said this. Hi, Raven. You guys are so helpful. I mean, it's like, the last few Sundays, Pastor Clayton had been preaching about witnesses to Satan's plan. We all know God has a plan for us, he said, as he crossed to the other side of the stage. Then he paused and turned back a little to shout, well, so does Satan. So does Satan, my friends. And he shook an accusing finger at the congregation. We've seen those poor souls whom Satan has most surely taken as his own. Those who will find the road back to salvation long and difficult. And, it's just, even just the actions that he does are so... Okay, sorry. It just was... It brings back a lot of memories, and not good ones. So anyways, but I mean, I found it really interesting. But I mean, it's like this part here too. I swear, like I could hear this in the quote unquote pastor's voice from when I was growing up. I could hear like this exact situation. This is where he was talking about, God being male and, all that kind of stuff. But it's like, followers of our Lord Jesus Christ, if you've been watching the news, you're aware of the preposterous shenanigans students have been involved in lately at our country's universities, these so-called places of higher learning. And I'm especially thinking of certain young ladies who call themselves the Women's Liberation Movement. Pastor Russell paused to punctuate the line with a laugh of disbelief and a shake of the head. Friends, their use of the word liberation confuses me. Liberation from what? I have to ask. Brothers and sisters in Christ, ask yourself. What are they talking about? Liberation from men? Half of God's plan for the continuation of our great human race? Liberation from marriage? God's holiest of communions? Liberation from having children? God's promise of the future? Liberation from looking after a family, a home? As if this is such a great burden. In a Christian home, it is a joy. Like, I honestly, I swear I heard like almost exactly the same. Like, I'm wondering if, was she sitting in on the same sermons I was? Anyway. So anyways, I found that one a really, really interesting story. And I've read, and then the other two were also quite interesting. So far that's my favorite one. The other ones, I would say probably all of the stories are getting, anywhere between a 3 and a 4 for me. So yeah, I'm going to keep on reading that one, and I will let you know how that goes. And then in the biggest book that I have ever read in my life, I am over 50% through The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. And I'm finding this one really interesting. I really like I'm starting, now that I've kind of got my grasp on the world and everything, I'm finding it quite intriguing. I'm still not super attached to any characters. I would say probably the ones I'm the most attached to would be Tane from the east and Ede from the south. But I'm not like, and I don't know if it's because I kind of know that, characters will die in a book this big and stuff like that. So I'm not letting myself get super attached, but I'm interested in them. I'm just not like super attached to them as people. But otherwise, it's a very, very interesting story. I like the whole aspect with the dragons. I really like the Eastern dragons, especially the good ones. And yeah, so I'm finding it more and more interesting, and it's getting more and more intriguing. Things are starting to really go downhill, now that it's halfway through the book. So, the world's starting to fall apart. So I'm hoping to actually finish this one not too long. I'm hoping to finish it for this vlog, because then I can move on to my next one as well. But yeah, I've got those 4 books that I'm in the process of reading right now, and I thought I would give you that little update. It's time for an update. I have decided to DNF this one. I gave it a really good shot. I actually got to page 166, so I was over halfway. But I want to like literary fiction, but I struggle with literary fiction. I don't get it a lot of the time. And for some reason, the author of this one she seems really obsessed with boobs. There was only one story that I read in there that I don't think mentioned them. And I'm used to that from guys, not so much from women. But yeah, I found it to be kind of an obsession. But anyways, yeah, no, I got partways into, I did read, after that last one I talked about, I did read a couple more stories, and there was a couple of them that I kind of liked. The Adult Games one was interesting, and the Maleness of God one was interesting that I talked about earlier. But yeah, I was reading another one tonight, and I couldn't do it. So I am going to DNF it. So I will be unhauling this one. So I'm going to keep, for this vlog, I'm going to keep reading the other one that I was reading, and then the big fantasy novel. And then I'm actually going to also start this one here. Now, this is a reread for me. I picked this one for the one challenge that I'm doing this year for the BTS book club. It's a monthly challenge, and the one for February was a book that gives you all the feels. And this has always been one of my all-time favorite books. I first read it back in high school, and I just love this book, and it does give me all the feels. I get excited, I get nervous about what's going to happen, I cry at this one part, and it's such a good book. So I am going to read this one before I pick any new ones, and I'm going to finish the giant tome, and I'm going to finish Why Shoot the Teacher and the Cowboy book. So still got a few to go for this vlog, but yeah, unfortunately I just have to DNF that other one. So I will let you guys know how the rest of it goes. Hopefully the lighting's not too bad here. I've got the window open again. Raven's up there chilling. But it's a sunny day out, so I wanted to have some nice sunlight while I read a little bit. So I was going to finish telling you about these books. So I finished Why Shoot the Teacher by Max Braithwaite, and this was the book that I had wanted to read of his. It's not one of his humor books, which, like I said before, I hit the humor did not age well, according to my thoughts anyway. So I But this one was a biography basically of his year teaching school during the 1930s in a tiny little one-room schoolhouse. And it actually was really interesting. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It was quite an interesting little book. Just, of course, the 1930s is one of my favorite time periods to read about. And what you doing up there, Raven? Huh? What you doing up there? Anyways, yeah, so the 1930s is one of my favorite time periods to read about. I just find it fascinating. And so this was quite an interesting little book. I have no idea why it has the cover it does, because that has nothing whatsoever to do with anything that happens in the story. But yeah, okay, anyway. So, but I did give this one 4 stars. So I am going to keep this one. I'm still unhauling all the rest of them because I just didn't. Hi, Raven. Oh, stop it, you guys. Don't fight. Got the old lady here too. Because I didn't care for the humor in that other one. So I'm going to get rid of the other ones. I am going to keep this one. I also finished the Canadian Cowboy one, which I don't have a copy of it with me right now because I gave it to my mom to read because I figured that she would really enjoy it. And that one I gave 4 stars as well. That one was a really interesting read because the guy, Andy Russell, who wrote it, he's a really good storyteller and he lived through that period. So he was born, I think it was in 1915. And so he grew up in ranching country before, when things were still quite open and there weren't a lot of fences and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of the stories that he told were things like that he had experienced firsthand, and a lot of stories about real characters that he had met over the years. And so it was super interesting that way. Some of the language, again, that was published in 1993, and I'm finding that books that were published in the early 90s, some of the language regarding certain races and that kind of stuff wasn't what it is today. So just be warned of that. But overall, the story itself was quite interesting. And he goes right through, he starts with, when horses and cattle and stuff first came to North America, and then goes right up through talking about the big trail rides where they brought cattle up from Texas, and a lot of about, dealing with the harsh winters in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. And it was super interesting. Lots of interesting stories and characters. So that one I gave 4 stars to as well. And then, so that was the 2 that I was still reading for my Read It and Haul It challenge. Like I said before, I got rid of, or I decided to DNF The Maleness of God one because I just wasn't finding it interesting. And yeah, I DNF'd that other Max Braithwaite one. So the other books that I've been reading that I'll just tell you about as I finish off this vlog, I am 66% through the audiobook of the Beyond the Story, the BTS story, 10 years. And I had read that one for the first time last year. It came out last July. I had read it in the physical copy last year, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was my first 5-star book of last year. And so when I saw the audiobook was available from the library, I've been listening to that one so that I can kind of I wanted to reread it anyway. So I'm learning more stuff. I'm catching more stuff the second time through. And the audiobook is pretty good. The guy's voice is decent for reading it. And of course, the story is super interesting. It tells the story of the band BTS from South Korea, from the time that they were formed all the way through their first 10 years of existing, and all the hardships that they faced. And they really struggled because they were from a small company in a time, especially when the big 3 companies that were over there controlled everything. And so they got a lot of discrimination, a lot of hate, but how they succeeded in becoming the biggest band in the world right now. This is Stevie. I could go on for hours about them because I just love them so much, but I won't. But anyways, I recommend you check out, even if you're not into the band themselves, it's a really interesting story. So I would highly recommend you check it out. But yeah, I'm 66% into that audiobook right now, and I'm going to keep listening to that one. And then I finished the biggest book I have ever read, The Priory of the Orange Tree. Okay, Steve, nobody wants to see your butt. Okay. The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. And this was my first big fantasy that I've ever read. I had read, smaller, some smaller fantasy books and stuff, but this was the first giant one I've read. It's like 805 pages of actual writing. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I quite enjoyed it. The characters were interesting. The world building was interesting. I really liked the dragons. I'm finding that books with dragons in them are pretty cool. And so I really enjoyed that. I found it took me about halfway through the book. Pip. Got cats everywhere. Took me about halfway through the book to get really into, like, to really feel like I was really into the story, because the first half was quite slow moving with a lot of political intrigue and court stuff and everything and world building. But once it started to really take off, the action was really good. And then I also found it a little hard for me to get attached to some of the characters, just because I wasn't sure who was going to survive. And so I think mentally I was just kind of not getting as attached to the characters. But by the time it hit, about 2/3 of the way through, I was quite attached to some of them. So overall, it was a really good book. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to read the prequel at some point here because I enjoyed the world. Yeah. So it was kind of I guess the only thing that I found a little bit hard, and I think probably part of why I struggled to get attached to some of the characters too, was because it was the world that she built has a lot of religious intolerance in it, and that's one of my pet peeves in our world. So and the religion of the main country there that they're dealing with reminded me a little too much of certain aspects of our religions and stuff. So anyway, but overall it was really interesting and I really enjoyed it, and I am definitely going to read the prequel. So that pretty much sums up everything that I've been reading for this period here. And so I'm going to finish off with this vlog, and I'm going to go and draw some more books from my jar, and we'll see what I read next. So I will see you guys in the next vlog. Give me a like and a subscribe if you want to follow my reading journey. And and give me any comments if you've read any of the books that I've read. I'm curious. Oh, and also if you have any recommendations for any other good fantasy novels that are your favorites. My style is I'm not big on romance fantasy, the romantasy or whatever they call it now, because I'm not a big romance reader at all. But I like dragons, and I like medieval style battles and swords and sorcery and stuff like that in fantasy books. So if you have any series that you really enjoy that you think I might like, let me know down in the comments, and I will see you guys later. Bye.